Hey Lee, how are you? Dialed into
Welcome. This service is provided by Free Conference. If you are the host, press star now. Otherwise, please wait and you will be joined into the conference.
I think we got some folks on the phone with us as well. So Christian, it's not giving me, let's see, what is this? No. So this method doesn't give me an option to bring you on the video. So Christian, are you able to dial into that number? Hey, Christian. You on the call there, Christian?
Robert, can you hear me?
Yep. Is audio okay there?
Hey, how? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, is audio okay?
Yeah, no, I'm going to take out my earpiece here because I'm all set up in my little studio. I've got my lights and camera, and I'm all mic'd up. I thought we'd be live on video, so I'm just taking that out. So I was getting a delay and some feedback there.
Yeah, if you're on the phone, probably turn down the audio on Facebook so it doesn't confuse you.
Yeah. No chance we can get the video to work, you don't think?
It's not giving me an option to bring you on. It just says embed. It doesn't have a way to bring anybody on for some reason.
Weird. I thought in the past that worked for you.
Yeah, this is on my laptop, so for some reason it's not wanting to cooperate there. So apologies. Well,
no worries.
But I think we'll go and get started. Just keep everybody on schedule if that works.
All right.
So thanks everybody for joining. We do have several people on video. We got a couple of people dialed in as well. And so I think most everybody knows me. I'm not going to talk a whole lot. Christian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, my name is Christian Hanley. I'm a consultant. I actually own my own place called Defiant Strategies. I'm based in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. And what I really focus on is communication strategies for Democrats, especially progressive Democrats, labor, and sort of other progressive organizations. And so that's really my focus, making sure that we get good people in positions of power and making sure that they win and can actually stand up and use their voice for all of us.
Yeah. So came across your name through kind of a podcast match, and so we'll see. Thanks again for joining, and I've just kind of put a couple of topics together trying to do one of these, not necessarily, as we talked about, committed weekly, but just trying to keep up with our group here locally, especially after the elections. I know everybody's going to be busy with the holidays, especially through January, and to go from there. I was speaking with, so here in Georgia, we have created roughly a Georgia Indivisible Coalition, and there's about 12 to 14 indivisible groups across our state. It goes all the way down even to the coast of Georgia, down near St. Simons. It's not just the metro Atlanta area. And so we hope to have a meeting early next year, and to kind of bring all those folks together. And I was speaking with one of the ladies, Martha, over email. She was actually asking me, she says, "What are you doing on this meeting?" And I said, well, I met up with Christian, and I've been wanting to have, some of our candidates. And if I'm not mistaken, is Marianne and Tori, are you two on the call?
Hey, can you hear me, Robert? I'm here.
Hey, Tori. How are you?
Doing good. You doing all right?
Well, we haven't won the lottery yet, but... Tori, I'll let you introduce yourself as well. So.
Okay, I'm Tori Castellana. I am the candidate in the 35th House District for Georgia. Came real close. Missed by 1,040 votes, 52 to 48%. The man I ran against had been there 14 years. It's it used to be a very conservative district. It's changing, and he has not had anyone run against him in 8 years. So this was his first time to have somebody run against him, and I was outspent. He had a better name recognition, but we still almost won it. And I plan on winning in 2 more years.
Yeah.
That's the right spirit. Love it.
And so 2 of the races statewide, as we know, Secretary of State and one of the Public Service Commission seats, we had a runoff, this past Tuesday. I was scrolling through Facebook and the news this week, my hometown down in Albany in South Georgia. Someone posted yesterday that they just received their absentee ballot yesterday.
Now, come on.
Now, yeah, the runoff was Tuesday. Now my personal story from this was I travel a lot, and I normally do vote by mail because I never know how my schedule is if I'm actually going to be in town. So it's just easier for me to do an absentee ballot and vote by mail. And so this actual runoff, here in Cobb County, I went to the website. They told me that they mailed the ballot to me, but I kept waiting and waiting and waiting. I was like, well, I've only got this week for early voting. So I was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I just went into the poll and early voted. And I didn't know if they even had a process for this, but apparently they do. And later, after it was corroborated on the website here in Georgia, you can go and put your date of birth in. And they said that they canceled my mail-in vote, and then I was able to vote with an affidavit. But even the guy that interviewed me, I think with the New York Times, I said, this is 2018. Voting should not be this complicated.
Right. I agree.
So up there, and are you in Maryland there, Christian?
Yeah, I am in Maryland, working all different places, but that's where I'm based. And, I was going to say to you, 10 years ago, I was volunteering on the Obama campaign in New Hampshire, which is a swing state, registered in Massachusetts, but at the time of the election day itself, I knew I would be in Canada. And so I was able to receive my Massachusetts ballot in Canada and vote early, no sweat, right? I also know for a fact that in Maine and Vermont, they're able to get absentee ballots to people serving sentences in prison because there's no felon disenfranchisement. And so what I always notice is whenever there are these sort of, let's say, hiccups or irregularities or sort of things that aren't blatant attempts at voter suppression, things that are, but they have kind of this plausible deniability. You know, it can be written off as a mistake or a hiccup or whatever. They only happen in places that where Republicans want to hold on to power. They only happen in places that could swing the other way. They only happen in places that have large Black American populations. And there's no reason that in the country that invented the stealth bomber and the iPhone that we can't figure out voting. And it's intentional.
Yeah. And specifically here in Georgia, I don't know who all is aware of this. If you are out of the country, and if I'm not mistaken, if you have to prove if you're a service member. So the service members, I think, like they're in Afghanistan, overseas, they actually are eligible to vote online here in Georgia.
Wow.
But
that's, yeah.
But if I'm not mistaken, the rules are you have to prove, again, even like you're some kind of merchant marine or someone who is outside of the country like that. Otherwise, you know, you have to vote via mail. And it just, again, I'll say it again. It's 2018. I don't understand why it has to be this complicated. But yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It doesn't. It's intentionally made to be this complicated. I mean, this is not an immutable law of nature. This is very much fueled by drives at voter suppression in a time where, you know, having outright obvious things like poll tax and other impediments to voting can't be done. This is how they do it. These roadblocks.
And one of the nice little tools, I'm actually going to put it, several of you are joined in, is ResistBot. ResistBot will actually send you, and hey Ron and Rhonda and Sydney, thanks for joining. ResistBot will actually send you a copy of the front page of the AJC every morning to your Facebook Messenger inbox. And what I've been doing is taking a couple of interesting things, but I can't remember what day this week, but because of the runoff, our newly elected Republican Secretary of State has vowed to take all of the same things we've been worrying with that Brian Kemp was doing, and he's just going to keep doing the same thing the whole time that he's in office, of course. But that was one of the things that he is vowed to do. The other interesting thing about let's see, the ResistBot is if you choose, when you write to Congress, it will, you can choose to tweet your letter. And publicly, we can then actually go later. I've actually tweeted on our Twitter account several interesting letters. So there's a lot of nice little features that, you know, you can get from that. So I put a link out there to ResistBot if anybody is interested, because it's really nice little service there and keeps you engaged, and hopefully to keep our folks accountable. It is only for the federal, so here in the 11th district, that would be Barry, Purdue, and Isaacson. But it's a nice little tool there. But I think we can move on. Any other comments, even Tori or anyone else on the phone wants to talk about the election results?
Well, I'll go ahead and talk. I just noticed that it seems a little weird that a lot of the elections were 52-48. Did you notice that? And it just seemed odd to me. I mean, it makes you wonder what's going on, and you know, with the suppression, and I don't know. I'm very concerned. I've heard it from a lot of people in my area. I even had a lady down the street from me tell me that one of her votes, the ones for it was Flynn Brody's in the 11th. She voted for him, and it went to Barry Loudermilk. You know, when she saw the results at the very end, it flashed back. She had to go get a poll worker, but she is observant. Some people aren't. If we don't get a hold of this, a lot of people are starting to really lose faith in the elections. And you know, I'm glad Stacey Abrams is suing. She has some great attorneys, some voting rights attorneys on her side. And what this will hopefully do is get, you know, judges can't make the laws for us, but maybe throw us back in the state legislature and say, fix this by 2020. And that's what we're hoping for. And that's why I keep telling people, have faith, we're going to get this thing fixed. Even though we don't control the legislature, maybe the judges that will hear this will say, hey, fix this before 2020.
Yeah. Christian, there in Maryland, when you go to vote physically, do you get any sort of paper, like receipt of your ballot?
Yeah, so when I resided in Montgomery County, we had, this is, you know, years ago, we did have touch screen, but now in Baltimore City, it's the same ballot that I grew up with in New England, which is, you know, the traditional paper ballots where you have to, you know, read any ballot measure questions, you have to see the name of the candidates, fill in the SAT style bubble, and do that, and it's, you know, sealed up in a box. So yeah, voting in Maryland really has been not a very difficult thing compared to other places. You know, it's all relative. When I did volunteer with you know, 1866 Our Vote election protection on election day, and you know, all the phone calls that we fielded were from out of state, people being told that you know, their name had disappeared, that it wasn't spelled properly, that ballots were being stuffed in a closet in unsealed plastic bags, and all just kind of ridiculous things that we should not be settling for in America. Just completely unacceptable.
Yeah. And just to share, here in Georgia, I remember growing up and going into, you know, with my parents and grandparents, we had the punch cards. And, and you would slide it in at the top, and, you know, you had to punch, and that led to the Florida fiasco of the hanging chads, because I think Florida had the same system at the time. And of course, everybody was all up in arms. Well, we can't have that. We can't have that. And that led here in Georgia to the electronic screens that we still have to this day. So if you vote in person, you were handed a card that has a little chip on it, and you go and put that in the machine, but there is no other record. All of that becomes an electronic record tied to your voter ID. And that's going back to what Tori was just saying, is trying to come back this full circle. And there have been, I'm an IT guy, and I question things like this. For example, I haven't done this, I'm not trying to say, but I mean, the card that they give you at the polling place, is that really the card that every single person really puts in that machine?
Yeah.
I mean, this is... I mean, this is 2018, almost 2019. You know, and if I'm not mistaken, Brian Kemp's name was mentioned in one of Mueller's reports.
Oh, jeez. You know, the thing with Brian Kemp is that his conflict of interest was so great. It should not have been permissible for him to have been running a race in which he was also the referee. Completely absurd, and I too am glad that the Abrams campaign is suing after the fact. But what is different in our strategy overall as Democrats nationwide, it's not a Georgia thing. What's so different between us and Republicans is that I can't imagine the GOP even waiting for election results in a race like this were the shoe on the other foot. I truly believe they would have filed a suit, sought a temporary and then a permanent injunction. They would have done everything they could have done before the election to force the opponent's hand to get them to step down as the arbiter of the election. I mean, this is just completely absurd and really unbelievable in the United States.
Well, we actually had a Secretary of State, Max Cleland. He was a Democrat running for governor, and he actually did step down before the race. And we had another one, Kathy Cox, who did not step down, but if she won the primary, she was going to step down. But she didn't win the primary. So the Democrats have stepped down. The Republicans don't. We have a minority leader in the House by the name of Bob Trammell, who's going to present a bill come January of this next year to stop the purging of voters. In Georgia right now, after 4 years, if you have not voted, you get purged from the files. And their excuse is, well, it got passed in the 90s, this law did, but their excuse is to get dead people off the rolls. But that's not what they're doing. They're purging it of people who would vote but just haven't voted recently. I'm trying to contact Bob Trammell. I'd like to meet with him. I think it just, instead of doing that, let's do a comprehensive bill that includes automatic registration. A bill that includes you can vote anywhere in your county when we get the new machine. Technology is there, we can do that. Let's show the voters of Georgia on both sides, hey, we're interested in fixing the election so everybody gets voted. And give it a fancy name like the Republicans do with their bills that say it's a voting rights Georgia Bill Act or something like that. And let's do a press conference. Let's get out there. This is what we want to do: fix the election. Let's just do it all. Let's do a comprehensive approach. Of course, the Republicans will, probably get support for a vote, but at least we let the public know that's what we're interested in doing.
Yep. And that actually leads into, I think, a nice segue to our next topic is how do we keep the traction to the next election? Literally, everything we are doing right now does not cost a penny, tangible. Free conference call literally is free conference call. Obviously, you pay a monthly cell phone fee, right? We pay for our internet, but beyond the other regular costs we have, everything we are doing right now does not cost a penny. And that's why I was trying to, set these up on like a weekly basis as we have time to do this, and just get the word out. What I'll probably do is take this. This is being recorded, and you can then export this out to YouTube, and we can take certain snippets and take that. But even beyond that, every now and then we do get, I'll say, we get a hold of a reporter who is like-minded, who is willing to take one of our stories and write about it, and we get some press, and we all hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. But honestly, I asked Martha, that's in our group the other night, we honestly need a publicist that has the connections. And I don't know, Christian, if you have any ideas or anybody else, but we honestly need a publicist at this point to get these stories that we're hearing, the legislative session and everything, beyond because unfortunately, I even Barry Loudermilk, he was reelected here in District 11. He just put out his newsletter earlier. Just his Facebook post, I don't think he pays to boost them, but just his Facebook post alone get at least 3,400 impressions, and he doesn't have to pay for that, just because he's the incumbent. And so it's just building, continuing to build this group as not only just supporting our candidates, but we have got to get our message out there. And it doesn't always have to be a completely negative message. It's just telling stories like what we're telling right now, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, Robert, Chris, I can jump in here if you'd like. That's a lot of the work that I do because it's very hard for people, not just in politics, but in general, to sort of tell their own story because you're kind of a fish in water, right? Pitching stories to the press, producing videos, getting the right kind of post out there that will get some traction. All of those things are, skill sets of their own. And that is a lot of what I do. I think you're right that there needs to be ongoing communication. Here in Maryland, one thing that I was kind of banging my head against the wall about this past year was that, we have a wildly popular Republican governor. But he's wildly popular because nobody knows what he does. What they know is that they think he's a nice guy. They think that he is Mr. Chummy, Mr. Bipartisan, this, that, and the other. And what I would always say is, well, of course everybody thinks that. He has a communications team. They are constantly pushing that message in the off season, so that come election time, he has a 70% approval rating. He has approval among Democratic voters as well, and they ultimately ended up splitting their ballot and keeping him in office while voting for Democrats otherwise, even though I would bet you they could not name any of his policies or any of the horrible things about him, like the fact that opioid addictions and deaths have only gone up under his tenure, that Maryland went from being one of the top job-creating states under his Democratic predecessor, Martin O'Malley, to now being the bottom of the states in the Mid-Atlantic region. So it's, it really is an investment in communications to make sure that once you do have the next election come around, your side of the story is already out there in the public sphere, and you're not rushing to play catch up, which very often organizations can't do. It's too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a loose mechanism to produce press releases. Every now and then, those press releases do catch an eye of a reporter who is thankfully willing to take that and write a story. And our protests as well. At times, we have gotten TV and or newspaper coverage of our protests. So all of the above are great, but I think at times we can do more. And one of those I'm actually going to share out is the Stop Them campaign. And this was actually something that we did, which was negative Barry Loudermilk. One of our members went out to fec.gov and did some fishing and found some of his corporate donors, and specifically Publix. Publix is a large supermarket chain here in the Southeast. And I remember the phone call with a gentleman down in Central Florida that did their campaign stuff. He told me, he says, due to what your group is doing, we have no more money for Barry Loudermilk. That there are also what happened with Cindy Hyde-Smith out in Mississippi. These things, although I know, from other, aftermaths, people, they end up kind of funneling them through these other interesting PACs and what have you. But at least there's about 3 or 4 things that end up happening. Sometimes these things make news and the group gets press over it, especially when it involves money like this. And anything that is going to shine a light and a negative light on these candidates that we want to vote out, I think is a good thing. And I'll open the floor up for discussion on that too. So. Maybe describe it.
Well, I don't know if anybody else who's local wants to chime in. I do.
Yeah.
So what I would say about that is, you are right. There's sort of an art to revealing negative things, right? Because if it looks as though you're always on the attack, it can sort of backfire. But I think that where you're not working for a given candidate in particular, you are a movement outside of an election cycle, simply laying groundwork and doing the tough work before the next cycle. You do have a great opportunity where you can get the hard, cold facts about the incumbents out there in the public sphere, which then frees up a lot of room for candidates once they do materialize, because they then are free to stay positive and not have to point out all those negatives. You've already done that work. In terms of style, there is some work to be done to make the story interesting. Unfortunately, in social media and even traditional media, it's not possible to have a screenshot of a spreadsheet go viral and really gain traction in traditional news media. But, with tweaking there and the right storytelling, it is possible to get that out there and have it actually get some traction for you and lay the important groundwork for future candidates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what this particular campaign in its current form, we are going against David Perdue. And so, Christian,
okay.
I don't know if you know who he is.
I have heard the name, and I actually I was watching a clip about him that you had sent me earlier this week.
Yeah, I think he made it through. This is his second term. I have to go back and look. He has never held a town hall. And he is
right.
Georgia's junior, federal senator.
Right.
He even several months ago, at least 2 months ago, he graduated from Georgia Tech, as I understand it, and he was down there on the campus, and a gentleman walked up and under the guise, I get it, that he wanted a photo, but he asked, about his support for Brian Kemp, and he snatched the cell phone out of the kid's hand. He says, "We're not going to do this." And he was about to walk away with the phone. And the kid's like, "What, are you going to steal my cell phone?" He has ducked into restrooms to get away from, constituents asking questions. And literally as we speak, there is a formal complaint with the Senate Ethics Committee about his conduct. He has stood on the Senate floor, literally not specifically us by name, but he has called his constituents and basically us Nazis on the Senate floor, and later apologized for that. But it's not acceptable. You wanted this position that bad. This is what comes along with it. And you must sit down
right.
and meet with your constituents and address these issues. And he refuses to this day.
He's still in his first term. He's going to be up for re-election in 2020, and Stacey Abrams has shown some interest in that race, and I think she could beat him. I think Trump's popularity is going to sink next year with the oncoming recession. I think that, and he is one senator that stood behind Trump on everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be a little bit like when Nixon was going down. Any politician that stuck by him, they lost in the re-election. And I think whoever runs against him, hopefully it'll be Abrams. I think it behooves them to have pictures of him or film of him supporting Trump, the things he said, because I think that's going to be toxic in 2020.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's literally been on the front page of the AJC within the past week or two. I saw it, that he is already preparing literally for a tough re-election. He knows it. He's admitting it. And so, campaigns like this, that it's tying him to Trump, it's tying him to the Russian collusion that every day is solidifying itself and putting him on that sinking boat. And then also, if he's allegedly Georgia's junior senator, he sure needs to act like it. So why are all these consumer products companies continuing to give him money to get him reelected? So, potentially we even turn that into some sort of a larger campaign that we just start calling out these donors and putting potentially these donors on billboards. Home Depot, Delta, SunTrust. Why are you donating money to this so-called senator that's not doing his job?
And also in Georgia, there's a lot of farmers that are hurting. Bankruptcies are up on farms. The soybeans are not being sold to China because of tariffs, and he stood behind Trump on the tariffs. It'd be a perfect opportunity for the Democrats to go out in rural parts of Georgia like Abrams did and get these voters that have switched to the Republican Party. Let them know we're going to help them out. And I just think you're going to see a lot of rural farmers hurting over the next year. They already are hurting, but they're going to hurt more. And they're going to turn their back on Perdue. I really do. I think Perdue's going to have a tough time. He didn't have a very tough run back in 2014. It was Michelle Nunn, who had never ran for office before. She was Sam Nunn's daughter. I really do think he's going to have a very tough opposition this time. He's not going to know how to handle. He does not do well in public. As you said, he never has had a town hall. Whenever he's been confronted by reporters, he gets real angry, and that's going to show. That's going to show in this next election. No one saw that back in 2014. They're going to see it this time.
Yeah. Christian, his excuse, he says that's not his style. He doesn't do town halls.
Interesting.
And in Georgia, we say, well, bless your heart.
Right. Well, there's a famous comedian who was raised, and he and I shared both his first name and his state. And after his tour went to the South and he came back up to the Northeast, he said, just so you all know, bless your heart is Southerner for go kill yourself. He said, it's one of the worst things a Southerner can say to you. Because, in the Northeast, we tend to be a little more direct and do not use euphemisms as such. But, I am optimistic about Georgia in the long run. And I concur with all that you've said so far. I mean, look, the Trump administration's idea on tariffs is that's really how the U.S. sunk from a depression into the Great Depression. Was after the stock market crash, this ridiculous sort of ill-advised protectionism. And if we're going to now head into a recession, which looks more and more likely, you're going to add that on top of these ridiculous tariffs. I mean, just today, I'm listening to NPR, and they're talking about, they literally interviewed a soybean farmer who was saying that they're going to have to store this year's harvest and let it sit there because it's not going to get sent to China. It's not going to get exported. A candidate like Abrams, who is looking to run on her merits, who is willing to put in the thankless, difficult legwork of going out into rural counties well in advance, who's sticking to bread and butter economic issues, I think they stand a good chance. And, Georgia is a state. I mean, I just got back from Georgia. We were down there this summer, and, it's not what it looks like to a lot of Northerners from old movies. This is, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, these are places that are down south, but, they're moving right along. These states are changing demographically, economically. They're part of the future.
Yep. And so also, not necessarily that everybody has a load of money in their pockets, but what we've, it's been pretty successful is we've taken our logo, which is the teal, blue, and red colored logo here. We actually, I'm going to say I borrowed that from another Indivisible group that I found online, and we've turned that into our logo here for our group here in Indivisible 11. And that is now a sticker and a magnet, because not everybody wants to do a sticker on their car. So just for the small amount of $5 or $11, and I put the link here through the ActBlue link. And during the month of December, our partners at Indivisible National have agreed to match that up to a maximum of $500. And the last time I looked, so far we are at about $110 of that so far. So we can continue to match that through the rest of the month. So we have an opportunity to get about $380 and double that, because Indivisible National is willing to match that with us through the month of December. And you get a couple of stickers or magnets, maybe as Christmas gifts. So, and this goes back to what we were talking about, having these conversations with, folks around you is like, hey, what's that sticker over there? And it has our website on it. And you can start these conversations. Even Tori has a great story of the huge Southern guy that he was afraid of. And, I still tell that story, that you were afraid to even talk to the guy, and he ended up being a not conservative guy, right?
Yeah, he was, he definitely didn't, I hate to say this, but yeah, we do stereotype, Trump supporters.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of, figure out who is and who isn't. We shouldn't do that, but I did. And what made it worse was I was with my dogs out in the woods and came across this guy, camouflage pants on, beard, looked just like, he had his dog, and we started talking. He started talking about his AR-15s, and he asked me what I did, and I told him I'm running for office, and he asked me what party, and I said, well, I'm running as a Democrat. He said, good, and he said, I found he's in my district. He voted for me. He just doesn't agree with the gun issue, and he asked me what my stance on guns were, and I told him that I pretty much don't think AR-15s belong in the public's hands, and he disagreed with me, but he said, I think the biggest problem facing us today is income inequality, and he said, if we don't fix that, no need to worry about the gun issue.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's a hell of a story. That's something you'll be telling your grandkids. That's something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I have a few stories like that. It's amazing when, I usually, in business, I don't talk politics, but since I was running for office, people I talk to, I bring up politics and, just get their idea of what they think is wrong. And I'm going to tell you, the things I heard the most of was healthcare and student loan debt. Those two things were the two things that got brought up the most, healthcare and student loan debt. And I think we need to put that in the forefront. Healthcare is a big issue for a lot of people.
Oh, look, I mean, I think that when you're talking about legislative races, you really do need to address a lot of regional concerns that can't get addressed at the national level. But look, when it comes to national level Democratic politics, yes, I think that Trump and his cronies need to be held accountable. No, I don't think we should back off of that. But really, in a country where, student loan debt is basically stopping an entire generation from buying a car and buying a house, which then in turn prevents older generations from being able to sell their homes and retire and whatnot. And when you have people who end up in the streets, bankrupt because of healthcare bills, those are your issues. That and income inequality that is driving in a lot of regards to those issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. It's funny, the guy I ran against at Southside, I became good friends with the lady he went to school with through this election, and she has a disabled son. And she told me she makes $70,000 a year, and her son is in a wheelchair, and she's spending around $20,000 a year on her insurance policy, on the deductible and the percentage she pays every year. That's almost 1/3 of her salary.
Right. And I'm saying it's like her gross income.
Yeah, her gross is $70,000.
Jeez.
And she spends around $20,000 a year on insurance, on the policy, the deductible, and her percent after the deductible. And she said she has no money for anything. And, it's not her fault that she has a disabled child. He was born with a very rare disease. And it's very, very sad. I mean, that people are suffering, and the Trump administration just turns a blind eye. And that could be any of us.
It could be any of us. I mean, just this morning, I was listening to another podcast on Medicare for All because I managed a campaign for a candidate who wanted to use kind of, how basically the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was, based upon Mitt Romney.
I think he happened to drop out there. This happened a second ago. I think he'll dial right back in. You still with us, Tori?
Yeah, I'm with you now. Yeah, we were talking about that's Mitt Romney's plan. Actually, that plan was devised by the Heritage Foundation, which is a very big conservative group. And that was there back in 93, I believe it was, 93, 94. That was their plan. They were going to go against Hillary's plan that she had. And they were going to use that against her in case her plan came to the floor, but never made it out of committee. But yeah, that's the Obamacare. It's a patch. It's not what we need to fix the healthcare problems. They had to appease a lot of organizations when that got passed in 2010. They had to appease the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies. There was nothing in there to control the cost. One thing I look forward to now, I think we have a lot more progressive people in the Democratic Party than we did back in 2009, 2010. And I see a movement more towards a single payer, when back then it wasn't even brought up to the table. I just see people accepting that more. I always tell people we have such a great healthcare system. How come nobody's copying?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this is Christian. Sorry, my phone dropped the signal there a minute ago, so I'm not quite sure where we left off. But no, you're exactly right. I mean, the Affordable Care Act was a patch job on a mess of a system. And in fact, I argue the U.S. does not have a healthcare system. The system implies interconnected mechanisms that work together, whereas what we have is a disjointed hodgepodge where you have competing interests, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, all vying for their own profits. You know, I was listening to a podcast this morning where a candidate whose campaign I managed, he was being interviewed because in addition to being in public affairs, he was also a practicing doctor. And he was talking about how, you know, this could happen to any of us where, for lack of a universal healthcare system, our lives get ruined because of an accident. He has a patient who comes to him because he works at kind of a semi-free clinic, and this guy has an accident. The accident then causes him to lose his job. Because he loses his job, he loses his healthcare insurance, and because he loses his health insurance, he loses his house. Then his fiance leaves him, and he's dumped, broke, and homeless, and has to move in with his kids. All because of one accident that made him lose his job, that made him lose his health care.
Yep. And
that could happen to any of us.
That could happen to any of us tomorrow. I mean, that's the scary thing about our country is that we always have this gnawing stress of an accident or one bad break being our last.
And so this question was posed to a staffer of Barry Loudermilk. I think it was his main man. I forget the press or what have you. And the response was, "Well, that's what friends and family are for."
Wait, what did he say? I didn't hear that.
So Barry Loudermilk, our congressman, District 11 here, one of the guys in our group asked this basically the same question. And the response was, "Well, that's what friends and family are for."
Yeah, that's
That just reminds me of Mitt Romney running for president and being asked, "Well, what about student loan debt?" Him saying, "Well, then don't go to an expensive school and borrow money from your parents instead of from a bank." The detachment from reality that so many of these people, especially on the right, have it's unforgivable.
Yeah. And the other thing that I keep saying about healthcare, nobody complains about Medicare. I have a conservative uncle. A conservative uncle. I think he just went on Medicare, and he is swinging from the rafters, amazed, loves Medicare, and he is the most conservative person I know.
Right.
Why is that not good enough for everybody else?
Exactly. And I mean, look, Canada, the UK, France, they all have conservatives, but none of them are so conservative that they're willing to give up their health care. I mean, now that they have it, they're not going to cut off their nose to spite their face.
Well, you know, it was Conservative Party in Canada that started this single payer system. That's so strange, man. Right. It shouldn't be a conservative issue, but it is in this country. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we do know why. It's the fact that there are people who make quite a lot of money off of human suffering in this country. It's disgusting to say, and I'm not trying to find any particular individual, but that is true. I mean, when you have a business model that profits off of cancer, that profits off of pain, that profits off, it's literally profiting off of suffering. Why else would we have Congress that would prevent the federal government from negotiating down drug prices the same way that the NHS does in Great Britain, or that they can do in any other country with the universal system of healthcare. And so that the pharmaceutical companies, even when they sell to people who are on a public form of insurance like Medicare or Medicaid, they still get their profits at taxpayer expense.
Yep. All right. Well, probably close a few things up. Our friends in District 6. So, Christian, I'm guessing that you know who Karen Handel is, yes?
Yes.
So our District 11, I literally live across the street from District 6, which is where Karen Handel just lost. That's how gerrymandered I am until 11. But she just lost. It was close, but she still lost. But we did partner with our friends in Indivisible 6. We actually had at one point during the election cycle about 15 billboards up around the area. And several of those were for Flynn Brady, several were for Lucy McBath, and thankfully Lucy won. And so a couple of, I'm not going to be able to make it, so I've got to fly out of town for work, but on December 16th, they're going to do a Flip the Six celebration. And that event sold out within a day or two. That group in Indivisible 6 is amazing. All that they do for the candidates and everything in that area. So if you got a ticket for that event, it is a hot ticket. They were literally only $10, but it is kind of a hot ticket for that event on December 16th. And so we do have a couple of people from our group going to continue to support our friends literally across the street from me in District 6. So, but otherwise, I didn't want to take up too much more time. Thank you, Christian, for joining. Thank you, Tori. Thank you to the others who stuck with us the whole time here. Any other parting comments before we kind of wrap this up this evening?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me. I enjoyed being able to be a part of this moment, even though I don't live in your area. And, I hope to stay in touch with you all. And I'm really hopeful for both your home area, but also for your state at large. I think that despite what has happened recently, you have a bright future, and the rest of us across the country are watching, and we're not going to let what has happened this past year go unchallenged, and we're not going to forget.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the support, definitely. All right. Well, I'll leave everybody out to your Friday evening and won't take up much more of your weekend. And there's also maybe snow and ice coming. Everybody's freaking out on the news around here because Atlanta shuts down. So not necessarily go and raid the stores with milk and bread, but I think it's going to be a non-event. But we'll see what happens. But everybody stay safe and have a good weekend.
Thank you, Rob.
Good night.